Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Diversity with Dale, where we discuss various aspects of diversity in workplaces. I am your host, Pallavi Jha, Managing Director of Dale Carnegie India. Today on the show, I'm joined by my two very special colleagues from Dale Carnegie. Introducing first our senior consultant based out of Mumbai, Tanmay Srivastav. And I have a special guest from Egypt, Senior Vice President Global Accounts, Noha El Dali, from our Dale Carnegie and Associates headquarters. So welcome Noha and Tanmay, our resident experts in diversity, equity and inclusion. In this episode, we are going to talk about what is the current state of diversity, equity and inclusion in the Indian context. To understand this better, Dale Carnegie India conducted a survey over 2 months amongst 80 large and medium-sized organizations across the country. The findings in the research report are literally hot off the press and full of insights. So we are excited to share these key findings and analyze them together for you. So let's get started. Noha and Tanmay, welcome and thank you for joining us. This has been a great effort, 2 months of putting together this whole exercise, having very in-depth conversations with HR leaders in several organizations everywhere. And what we found starkingly for India is that diversity is an agenda that is led by very large companies, but the mid-sized companies are lagging behind severely. Now, I find that really odd because India is such a diverse country. So what do you make of it? Why do you think that's the case? Tanmay, would you like to, since you are closer to home, would you like to say anything about that?
Oh, yes. Firstly, I have to say that this report just gives you very rich insight on the DEI, on the Indian corporate landscape, including few very important sectors in the country today. And in the Indian context, the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a phenomena which has been displayed by large organizations, and you're right there. I think it tells you that a lot needs to be done to bring things like awareness, bring change in beliefs, attitude, adopt different diverse workforces. So a lot needs to be still done. But yes, you're right. The data tells us that only the large organizations are the ones who are being more proactive in this than the medium or the small organizations.
Right. And, what fascinated me was 62% of the people said diversity was mainly gender diversity, and that's too focused on women. Noha, what do you think about, do you see this happening in the rest of the world where there's just diversity is understood in a very narrow way, or are you seeing trends around the world which are different, and is diversity different in different places?
So thank you, Pallavi, for this question, because while India has a very broad diversity, what we see in the Indian market is unfortunately not unique to India, unfortunately or fortunately. It is just that diversity, if we look at the definition of diversity, it could be quite narrow. And over the years, companies have been looking at diversity with the pure definition of what diversity could look like or could mean, which is whether it is gender, it is ethnic, it is language. When we come to talk about diversity in the workplace, then it takes a much broader sense. And over the past few years, this is where the meaning of diversity, equity, and inclusion started taking a broader definition. So it's a matter of really a better understanding maybe of what is a broader definition of the terminology and what can we do in our work, in our workplace with our team members that is within our area of control rather than just what is the definition and what it means from a geographical sense. Which is not in our area of control. So yes, as you were saying, it is maybe a narrower definition, but it's just because it's an evolving definition when it comes to the corporate world.
Right. I mean, there are so many aspects of diversity, as you mentioned. I mean, we have gender and language and culture, which is the obvious ones that people have been thinking about. But in the last 5, 6 years, we've seen the addition of so many other areas, people with disabilities. We are looking at sexual orientations. We are looking at neurodiversity. But even very simplistically speaking, an organization is made of different functions. And when we were discussing it earlier, you talked about functional diversity and the subcultures that exist. What would you like to say about that, Noha?
Yeah, and this is really, in my view, a fascinating part of diversity and inclusion. When we start looking at what happened since the pandemic hit a few years ago, this is where we started looking at inclusion and what is a true part of the inclusion part of diversity, if we want to put it this way, which, as you said, you have the different corporate cultures that one could have, just because if we are hiring from outside of the company, each person comes with their own background, with the culture of the corporation that they were working in. And so it becomes a melting pot of, for example, corporate cultures. That in itself is a certain diversity that we need to keep in place. And how do I include everybody? How do I onboard everybody to our corporate culture, the company's corporate culture? And then, as you were pointing out as well, is that within the same company, when we talk about, but why don't we have strong cross-departmental collaboration? It's because each department has its own priorities, has its own culture, maybe because of the leadership of the department, maybe because of the profiles of people that we have in each department. And the beauty about it is that once we start understanding this, then it becomes a lot more within our area of control to say, what are we going to do about it?
Right.
It's not just about, okay, are we diverse enough, but how do we include people? So are we inclusive enough within the organization?
I think that's a great point. And, Tanmay, if you really see, we in India are so naturally used to diversity. I mean, we've grown up talking about unity and diversity and, literally, eat different cuisines every day, etc. But it's very interesting that the larger segment of the corporate face, which is small and medium companies, which employ 70% of the workforce, really are not thinking about diversity at all. And you made the point earlier about awareness. Why is it important for companies to think about diversity, to try and aspire for greater diversity and to make it more effective? Why should they worry about it at all?
Well, we see India as a country which has got diverse culture itself, and one would believe that any Indian organization, especially if it's a mid-size and the small one, this should be in their DNA because they live and have seen these things day in, day out. But that is not happening, I think, for two reasons primarily. One is that the mindset is still not there to kind of include DEI in their culture of the organization, because one, there is a lack of awareness, yes, that's still very rampant and which can be visible also. Second is it's all about what is there for me, how will implementing DEI will actually help me in my organization in terms of performance, in terms of culture, in terms of a cordial relationship between the people. So all that needs to be something which needs to be told to them, because right now they're not aware about it, and that becomes the biggest stumbling block for them. And then many people are just kind of doing, and there are organizations which are doing because they are supposed to be seen as a good, well-informed organization if they do these practices. And sometimes they're just doing it for even maybe PR purpose. The way I look at this, at least they're doing it. That's a start somewhere, right? But I think it's important to give them the reasons to why they should do it, and that will motivate and inspire them to kind of follow this. Otherwise, as I mentioned, that even the report suggests we still have a long way to go, and awareness plays a very important role in that.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you that if diversity initiatives are not well understood and they don't have a larger goal, then we may not even get the benefit of it and may remain showcase cases. And like you said, could be something to enhance corporate reputation, but very superficially. But Noha, so what's the case for diversity really? Is there a business case at all? And is it only a business case? What would you say about that?
So yes, and if I can build as well on what Tanmay was saying earlier, is that the business case here, I think, goes on several, or there are several levels to it. The first level, as Tanmay and yourself you were saying, Pallavi, is that first we need that awareness. And over the past few years, if not decades, we have been talking about awareness. But what after awareness? So what many companies have been doing has remained at the level of awareness. And I think it's really a great time. And as Dale Carnegie, this is really what we're working with companies around is, okay, let's take that second step. What do we do next? And what do we do next is empowering people with the needed for them to really be able to do something about diversity and inclusion. So if I take inclusion first, yes, the first level is the awareness of what is the benefit of inclusion. And we've been working with many organizations globally on setting that awareness from leadership levels to organizational level as to what's in it for me as an individual to be able to include others. What's in it for my team for it to be more effective? What's in it for my organization for us to be able to attract the right talents? So the business case here, it is not just about ticking a box about, yes, we are an organization which is perceived as diverse or to be inclusive enough, but it's how does it truly impact my work? The second part that Dale Carnegie we actually work on is, okay, now that we know the business case, how are we going to be providing individuals with the needed competencies for them to do something about it? And this is really the diversity, equity, and inclusion model that Dale Carnegie has is truly founded on that. It's founded on the competencies needed by individuals for everybody to be empowered enough to accept others, to include others, and to be included as well. So it's not just about how others are including me, but it's how am I positioning myself to include myself as well as to include others.
Right. I mean, that's very well said, because I think a lot of people, when we meet in forums and who talk about their diversity initiatives, are very often throwing statistics at us, talking about we have 40% women, or we have a 40% diverse group, or that's our aspired goal. But those are all eventual outcomes, right? I mean, even if you put together a diverse group, how do you make it work together for the benefit of the organization? And in many ways, whether it drives better collaboration, whether it just drives more innovation, ability to talk to different customer segments, I think there are some real tangible benefits to be had. But that begs a question, Tanmay, is, are we looking at diversity? And maybe that's one of the reasons why our data shows that organizations have been struggling. Even the organizations have been working on diversity, have been struggling to achieve the results of diversity. Do you think it's because it's just an HR-driven initiative, or what can be done better? What needs to happen for it to really succeed?
Palvi, I think for it to be success, I think it's important for organizations to realize that this is not a one event kind of a thing. This is a continuous and sustained activity that you have to do over a period of time. And yes, you may not be able to see the tangibilities in the initial few months or phase of it, but at some point you will start seeing the benefits of it in terms of new idea, in terms of newer talent pool, as what Noha was talking about. And again, this has to come from top of the pyramid. This has to come from the management. That mindset has to come. So until unless we don't see that mindset, and that's where the whole game of mindset becomes so important, that you can't move without it. And then how do you change mindset is where you continuously keep on through sustained effort, through awareness program, through what are the tangible benefits that an organization can look at in the future. This is something that needs to be drilled down. Until the time we don't achieve that, it will just be a nice, initiative, but in ground, nothing much is going to move. So I think it has to be where the management is involved, saying that we will take the lead, we will take the initiative, and they will have to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the more you look at a short-term goal, a showcase piece, or just look at it as a CSR activity in a sense, I think we shortchange the opportunity that is available to actually create and leverage a diverse workforce. So while we are doing that, we are obviously seeing that the last few years have been very. It's given a huge momentum to the whole space of diversity and inclusion within workspaces. But COVID really changed the rules of the game for everybody. So in what way, and our research really says that COVID gave a huge momentum to diversity initiatives. In what way, Noha, do you think COVID or the pandemic, in a sense, impacted diversity? And why have those situations arisen to give that importance to diversity?
Yeah, and it's true that there's so much that has happened since the pandemic hit, and there is a silver lining to it, as there is to everything. The silver lining is that many organizations were unable or were reluctant, let's not say unable, but were reluctant to, for example, have a hybrid workplace where allowing certain individuals to work remotely. And that was truly impacting the diversity that an organization could have. And then overnight, everybody had to have, a hybrid workplace, and maybe not even hybrid, but it was remote at a point in time, and now it is hybrid. What this entailed is several things. One, everybody went to work remotely, while people might not have been ready to lead remote individuals, for example, in terms of how do I manage the performance of individuals? How do I keep them engaged? How do I continue communicating with individuals if I do not see them on a daily basis? And so while we're saying that we had a remote workplace, I would say that we had people working remotely, but I can't really say that it was really a remote workplace because people were just left on their own. And so this is why we're seeing many of our clients coming back to us as Dale Carnegie and asking us, how do we have a remote workplace environment or a hybrid workplace that is efficient, that is productive? How do we start providing our leaders with the competencies needed for them to be able to give enough airtime to people with whom they do not have face time? So if they do not see them on a daily basis, how do we ensure that we still enforce or we still give them the right level of communication, the right skills, that we support our team members in how to become efficient? Because it's not just about leadership. It's about those who are working remotely. And we've seen this with many of our clients who tell us the level of engagement has dropped. Yes, it has dropped because in many cases, people are not used to being alone and working alone. And so this feeling of loneliness, unless the leaders are working on it, unless individuals understand what is happening in a hybrid workplace and how to become efficient, how to manage the multitasking that they have when they have to work at home, that is really something that we're seeing many companies come to us now and say it is an issue. And those who are not coming and having it on top of their agenda will be sooner or later, and hopefully sooner than later, because it is truly an issue that the competencies have not yet been instilled. So what the pandemic has done is that it has expedited the remote workplace, the hybrid workplace concept, without competencies supporting it. And now it's just a matter of taking a step back. And as Tanmay was saying, it needs to be sustainable. And so what do we need to do? How do we work it? So as a company and as HR, there is a lot to be done to really support that. But the beauty about it is that, well, people are not resisting the remoteness or the hybrid workplace, but now it's about empowering people to have the right skills for it.
And Pallavi, if I can add to what Noha just said, in fact, how important the diversity at workplace has changed in the COVID-19. In fact, the research also shows very interesting thing that almost 55% of the organization believe that COVID-19 gave momentum and the way our need of accepting diversity and building inclusiveness. So things have changed, and obviously things like empathy, appreciation, supporting and listening, and all those things have actually increased. And that's what, in a way, we say that sometimes it takes a crisis to change our mindset. Unfortunate it is, but that's how it has happened, wherein more and more organizations are now really focusing on this area, which is something that I agree with Noha was not in their agenda in the earlier scheme of things.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges that we've had is for individuals. I think they've been working remotely. Of course, they have lost their, their ecosystem in which they would actually be operating and be efficient. Now they're left on their own. And very often, when you just set time and agendas, Zoom meetings, etc., you don't really get to pick up ambient information, ambient coaching, somebody just, tapping you on your shoulder and just telling you how to do something. So I think a lot of that has got lost. And I think there's a huge challenge on learning yourself how to do things. How do you showcase to your boss the work you have done? Because you're just not in front of him, right? And it's the same challenge on the other side of leadership, is that you're out of sight, you're out of mind almost. There's what we call is the proximity bias. So, Tanmay, we were talking about that. Can you elaborate a bit on about proximity bias and how that worked and how that actually created challenges for inclusion during the pandemic or during the remote work space?
Well, this proximity bias is something that not many people realized earlier. But what happened is that over a period of time, while we all are working from our remote locations, and then few people started going, to the organization and working in the office, it just happened that, you start feeling, that something is missing out. So while you may be doing, a lot of work, you may be working 14, 15 hours while at home, but who is looking at you? So somewhere you start feeling really insecure, and you start thinking that I'd rather work 12 hours in the office than working 15 hours at home, because at least someone is there to look at my work and things like that. And then there was, because the communication with the bosses was not happening on a regular basis the way you would probably do in any organization, that was also adding to this whole pressure. So one is, who is watching you working? And in many organizations, many functions, things are not black and white. So for example, a sales is black and white. People can see that the work is actually happening, but in certain other functions, it is not so black and white. So how do you tell that I am actually doing my work? And again, at the time when, people were getting fired and people had to leave the organization, this was also creating an amount of fear in their mind, which actually had a ripple effect in terms of their performance and everything. Yeah. So I think that's something which was also worrying people a lot, and with a cascading effect.
So very often we think of competencies, and Noha, you've talked a lot about the competencies that we need to be effective and inclusive. But very often the competencies are not just cultural competencies. In the context of diversity, we think about, okay, so I have to make a visit to Japan and I should know and understand their language and culture and mannerisms, and be respectful of that. But in sheer functional competencies, to be more inclusive has become a huge leadership challenge, right? We don't know anymore how to manage people who are not in front of us. We don't know how to coach them and give them feedback, performance management. But at the same time, there's been a certain level of humane leadership that has come in because of the pandemic. Everybody's had to be more empathetic for both physical and mental health. And I think that conversation is only growing. So I think with the rise of empathy being one of the competencies, dignity and respect, listening, these may not have been traditionally associated with what we call as diversity and awareness training. But these are competencies that actually, bottom line, directly impact how to make a really successful, inclusive workplace. That said, there are still challenges, and our research really brought out what are the top challenges that diversity leaders or organizations that have been trying to implement diversity and make most of it. The first that came forth was cultural resistance. And in cultural resistance, it's really about, whether it's the top management or whether it's HR actually trying to come out with a policy or a guideline or a goal that says, let's become more diverse in XYZ ways. And then the regular workforce feels a bit threatened. And then there's a natural resistance. How do you think something like that? How does something like that happen? And what could be some of the pitfalls? Is it just a policy? Does policy alone work? And what is the larger work that really organizations have to do?
Pallavi, let me take this first and know how you can come after that. I think, we all are good in making policies, but I think when the policies are getting made, it's important to make sure that people are living that policy. It's everything that you do, it should reflect in that. It should not be on mere paper. It should not be that on paper it is there, but in practice it is not there. Right? For example, our own research gives a very interesting thing that almost like 50% of 50% of the organization defer their plans when it comes to hiring candidates with physical disability or with different sexual orientation. Now, that is a part of the policy document, but look at the numbers that research is telling us.
Yeah.
Also, one of the biggest resistance point, Pallavi, is that there are some people who unfortunately have not been able to, they think that this is for other set of people, which I'm not part of. So therefore, why are they getting privileges of some of these things, whereas I am not? So this is going to be unfair. So this kind of a mindset also kind of, prevents us from accepting those changes and being open to these changes.
Yes. Noha, would you like to add to that? Yes.
Yes, and one of the things that recently I was just talking to a very large organization which is expanding into a new geography. It's actually a new continent. And for them, as you were pointing out, Pallavi, earlier, they were saying, okay, those are the nationalities we are going to be dealing with. And so how do we understand those specific nationalities? And this was a very interesting discussion that we had with them, where we were telling them, so with the diversity that we have in all our countries, is that working with a certain country doesn't mean that we're working with a certain nationality. We would have various nationalities in it.
Yeah.
And within the same organization, because of companies having such a multinational outlook to things, you would have different cultures and nationalities within an organization. So as you were saying, Pallavi, is one of the things that we've been talking to this client about is what we need to really be empowering people with is the empathy and how to best understand others, irrespective of their nationality, culture, gender. It is really looking at the individual rather than the differences that we have between us. It is more looking at what is a common ground. How do we understand each other? Which is one of the things that Dale Carnegie really focuses on. And in our diversity, equity, and inclusion model, we really work on first the foundation is to have that understanding of how can I then have the confidence to understand others, the empathy to understand others. And this level is really what empowers individuals, that irrespective of the environment that they will be in, irrespective of the people that they will be encountering, then they will be able to engage with those individuals in the right way, in a way that would encourage that level of inclusion, of empathy that is needed for us to work together. So this is from a very corporate perspective, but this also helps the individuals on a personal front. So we all now deal with individuals, and we have friends from, and our circles are from various geographies, various cultures, various genders, various sexual orientation. And it's more of a mindset that we need to be working on. And this is something that we truly see that this is needed to have that right level of equity.
Pallavi, if I can just add to this, because this was something very interesting. In fact, the research finding also mentions, besides cultural resistance, one of the top other challenges faced by organization is the lack of top management intent.
Absolutely.
And just a few minutes back, we established that it needs to be a top-down approach. It needs to stem from the top. So I think that's something which is an area which needs to be looked at. One of the also challenges is mentioned very clearly is the inadequate training. So now we have established two things: the intent from leadership and inadequate training. And again, there are things like awareness and some kind of a lack of metric. Yeah. I personally believe that every leadership program or interviewing skills program should actually have a component of DEI. Because, for example, if you're interviewing people, there are a lot of things that people may ask which may not be acceptable, be it in India or in the international areas. And we don't even realize. So we're not being, we're not being selfish in that, but then we don't even know. We're not even aware about those things. Second is with regard to any leadership program, I think leaders is all about dealing with people. Yes. I think you can't afford to go wrong in that. I think that's where I strongly believe that DEI should be an essential component in any training program with regard to leadership.
Absolutely. Because, I think the biases that we carry and the stereotypes that we carry in our heads affect our decisions. And sometimes we may pass off. I mean, just like remote work is giving you access to people in any part of the geography or any group to actually get the best talent, you could be limited because of your own biases and stereotypes to recognize or even want to work with that good talent because you've just got, limitations on how to work with these people because of your socialization, maybe because of your nurture. So it's very important to be aware of your unconscious biases and work with that. Surely. And I think a lot of that becomes self-awareness training, understanding how to break your own biases. And that's where, I would think training would have a huge role to play. And really 58% of our respondents, 58% of the companies we interviewed recognize that diversity in and of itself does not ensure inclusion. And therefore, I think there's a growing, at least for those companies that are already taken steps in the direction of diversity, they're focusing on making it work, and therefore the focus is becoming inclusion. And there are some best practices that we actually uncovered in our research. And Tanmay, I don't know if you have any summary of that or give a couple of shining examples, if you have that at the top of your head.
Well, Pallavi, the report gives very interesting things. That there are some industries which are doing far better as far as DEI is concerned, or probably their acceptance and adaptability to DEI is much more than the other ones. So, for example, if you look at it, hospitality and your IT services are somewhere, wherein they have really embraced this thing. Right. Whereas things like, I would say, e-commerce and some bit of manufacturing and few other industries are still kind of struggling to cope and accept some of these things. The interesting thing will be to also find out as to, what is it they are doing and what are the tangibles that they see, which probably other industries are not able to see it. and can we again create some cases in each industry to show that if you do this, or this is how it has to be done, then these are the results which you will be able to get in terms of higher engagement, in terms of better work culture, coordination amongst various employees, a nice work culture, which eventually and happy set of people, which eventually leads to new ideas and productivity and revenues, and everything will start falling in place. So I agree that DEI is a process. You can't have it as an outcome. The outcome is going to be seen, but we'll have to wait for some time.
Right. I mean, we hear time and again examples of TCS, Infosys from the IT industry, as you rightly mentioned, who will keep coming up as examples, who will have lots to share on what they're doing in that space. And I think those become examples of what other companies can look at. But at the same time, there is a way of creating what we call as a psychologically safe world inside your company, and that's almost like a beaten term these days, but it means a lot, and it's a heavy one when you have to try and make it. And diversity is frankly about that. Diversity or rather inclusion is all about that. Is how do you make everyone feel psychologically safe and confident to be able to participate, to be heard, to have a voice, because only then can they really meaningfully contribute. So Noha, I know in Dale Carnegie we've done a lot of research and work, and got a ringside view of what our clients are doing, how we've helped them, and we've obviously been able to develop a model that works for most of our clients. How would you be able to explain or describe that?
So the psychological safety is really the essence of this model, and the one of the main things here that if we were to just go over briefly what it is that first we need to work on oneself. So it's not just about is the culture of the organization or the values of the organization promoting diversity and inclusion, but it's really working on whether the individuals have this level that we were talking about earlier about empathy, what Tanmay was saying about the leadership intent. So the confidence of being able to, discuss with others in the right way. Then once we establish this, and to be able to establish this, it is ensuring that psychological safety is part of every aspect of the organization, every aspect of the meetings, of the performance reviews, and it's not just internal to the organization, but it's also with our clients. So when we have psychological safety, or for us to have psychological safety, we need to also have very key or understanding of key concepts, like how do I understand others in their true with their true intentions, not with my biases. So it's understanding oneself first, and what could be my unconscious biases. And when I first did the unconscious bias, because we work very heavily as Dale Carnegie on for us as well to be able to have those right tools. When I first did the survey, and having lived across all continents and having lived in so many different countries and cultures, I thought that I had a pretty solid understanding of what could be my unconscious biases. But it's amazing that when we do the survey, there are certain aspects that came to me that I had not thought about. So it's not about the ill will or not of individuals, but it's about expanding the concepts to individuals for us to have a better understanding. So it is ensuring psychological safety, understanding unconscious biases, for all of that to really have the equity becomes, it's not equality, it is equity within the organization, which then brings a sustainable diversity within the organization, because we could have a diverse workplace, but then people start leaving because it's non-sustainable. Because they do not feel that they belong. They do not feel that it is truly something that they could, that it is more, just lip syncing rather than a true culture. So what we work on as Dale Carnegie is truly to go into embedding those concepts within the culture for equity to be truly part of the culture, and then diversity becomes a result of it, of all of that.
In fact, if I can
Yes.
just quickly say that sensitivity and being aware of one's own subconscious biases is something that a lot of organizations and people are talking about in the corporate world, because we think that we know, but in reality we may not even realize. Things like microaggression is a classic example of that, and we have seen that as to how it is happening. So I think it's important that we need to also be realistic as to whether are we genuinely kind of have our own self biases. And some of these programs, Pallavi, when we attend these ones, we kind of realize that, maybe we have not been 100% fair and right. And you need to do a reflection at that point. And that's something which comes out is that as one of the key suggestions, that people need to do it at an individual level, and which obviously becomes a kind of a culture. And then obviously, it becomes a much more bigger movement, if one can say that.
Absolutely. And so I'm picking up these words about making it a movement, creating belongingness. That diversity is really an outcome. The way to get you to equity is through equity and actually through inclusion. So and we need a huge support from top management to do that. I think the business case should drive top management to think about it more deeply. Very clear. The more belongingness you create, the more engaged your employees are. The more engaged your employees are, the more productive your employees are, and that's the business case for you. Not to mention that when you put diverse groups together, you have great innovation happening, and you have great customer brands, therefore, that you can actually build. So both the employer brand, the customer brand, and the benefits of both of that is a very solid business case. But apart from that, I think there is also a moral case, because equity is something that all of us should strive for generally. So between today, the hard-nosed top management was to satisfy all kinds of stakeholders, you have something that tells you why businesses today can't ignore working on diversity and inclusion. And the generation Z and millennials who are driven by greater purpose, who won't buy from a brand who they believe is not ethical or purpose driven. I think there's a huge statement to be made. It's a workforce of the future, in a sense, and they will be looking for your employer brand. So there is a massive case, both moral and business, to look at this, and there are solutions and models that can help you get there faster. So on that note, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you, Noha. Thank you, Tanmay, for joining us and sharing all that expertise on the state of diversity in India and generally in the world, and how we can take it forward. I hope our listeners enjoyed the show. It was great having you with us. Thank you for listening to Diversity with Dale, and don't forget to share this with your friends. In the next episode, we will be discussing generational diversity. So until then, this is your host signing off.